Hello. Today I'll try to touch on the topic of earthquakes. Astrology and earthquakes. Is it possible to make predictions in this area? Some examples. Let's take a look. I don't know how long this will take. I'll try to be brief, of course. But let's give it a go. First, I'll bring up on the screen. This is the Live Horoscopes website where monthly forecasts are published for new moons, eclipses, mainly solar, sometimes lunar. In general, I believe that using these astrocartographic methods, it is quite possible to predict earthquakes. You could say that the entire Live Horoscope site was born thanks to the event of 2011, namely the great earthquake in Japan. If you remember, the city of Fukushima was affected. There was a strong tsunami, a leak of radioactive waste. Many people were affected. And what's interesting is that a week before these events, while experimenting once again, I actually made the correct prediction indicating the nature of the event. Natural indicated the location Japan and specified the timing with an accuracy of, I think, a day. I published this forecast in my live journal. It was a small note. Then, based on the materials of this small forecast after the event, I detailed where this forecast came from and what the prerequisites were. But I'll try to briefly explain now. At the same time, this will be a good example of the possibility of predicting an earthquake. Here is the chart for the new moon on the 4th of March 2011. The earthquake was, I believe, on the 11th, 9th of March, yes. There was a strong tremor, 7.2 magnitude. And on the 11th of March, the earthquake was already 9 magnitude. So on the 4th, approximately a week before the events, I constructed this new moon chart and saw the following picture. What alarmed me the most was this. The point of the new moon, which was in Pisces, fell at the midpoint between Mercury and Mars and between Uranus and Neptune simultaneously. Do you understand? That is, the point of the new moon already looked tense just because of this. And considering the directions, it was the Mars-Sun direction, which took about 7 days. So you add 7 to the 4th and you get the 11th. And the territory was as follows. So we have Japan, and through Japan passes quite accurately the projection of Mars. The very Mars, the direction to which could be seen from the horoscope 7 days later. With the latitude of the moon in mind, you see the moon also touches Japan. But in principle, Mars alone was enough. Here I marked the epicenters on the map. The main tremors were all located near the projection of the planet Mars. Let's move on. This will be a similar situation, but this will be, so to speak, a variety of earthquakes, namely a volcanic eruption. The year 2009. Here, it was possible to indicate seismic volcanic activity in Iceland using the projection of Mars. And at that time, too, by the way, the projection of Mars passed near Iceland. A well-known volcanic eruption occurred, which made adjustments for flights. Planes had to fly around this area for all of Europe, which else do we have here that's interesting? Recently, I wrote a retro forecast like this. Sometimes it's useful to look into the past to see if it's possible to predict major earthquakes from the past using modern methods. And I was interested in a rather strong earthquake in Almaty. In those years, it was called the city of Verni. The earthquake occurred on the 9th of June, 1887. Wikipedia indicates a magnitude of 7.3 for this earthquake. Quite significant considering the construction methods of those years. The destruction was very substantial. In a relatively small town, almost everything was destroyed and about 600 people died. This article is located on the Live Astrology website. There is a photograph of the destroyed buildings. Here too, the point on the moon in the second degree of Gemini fell at the midpoint between two tense negative planets, between Neptune and Pluto. Midpoints play a very significant role in such forecasts. It must be said that in the new moon horoscope, which precedes this natural disaster, generally speaking, the planets were grouped very tightly in Taurus. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planets. And this, of course, could have caused some disturbances. Well, and the projection here too. This forecast was resolved simply through the city of Verni, now Almaty. The projection of Mars passed through, the same in conjunction with Mercury and Neptune. Here, by the way, it should be added that Mercury and Neptune are usually neutral planets. I do not highlight them in any way, except in cases where these planets have negative aspects. Such obvious ones. So the conjunction with Mars is a negative aspect. Consequently, Mercury and Neptune take on some of Mars' qualities and also become tense. So we see this eclipse, one might say, was resolved simply. The next case is the year 2018, the 1st of December. In Indonesia, the Anak Krakatau volcano erupted, which led to underwater ground movements, landslides, which caused a tsunami. The wave arose near the Krakatau Islands in the Sunda Strait and crashed onto the shores. The authorities admitted that it was a complete surprise. The seismic services were focused on monitoring earthquakes. But due to the strong tide on the day of the full moon, pardon, I didn't write that very well here. I'd better show you the map. This is the place in Indonesia, Jakarta, not far from Jakarta. Here passes the projection of Pluto. Here too was the volcanic eruption, the death of about 300 people. And as we can see, the prediction of this place was possible thanks to the projection of Pluto. The article is also located on the Live Astrology website. Well, and this accordingly is a fragment of the previous new moon. The next case. We have already considered Japan. Recent cases are now being discussed by everyone. A significant earthquake in Turkey, which occurred quite recently on the 6th of February 2023. Was it predictable? Back in November 2022, a forecast article was published dedicated to the lunar eclipse. Yes, here I will draw your attention to such a nuance. Earthquakes can be indicated in several ways, namely, well, for example, on the previous new moon. That's one. Second, A more important and more significant indication would be a solar or lunar eclipse that precedes this event. In this case, the lunar eclipse took place on the 8th of November, 2022. This article contains a calculation of the peaks of influence of this eclipse. It was calculated, among other things, that approximately the 2nd of February 2023, give or take 3 days, I determined by eye. One of the peaks of influence of this lunar was calculated. Most of such negative energy can be directed towards North or South America because the lunar eclipse was best visible from this territory, but it was. Here is also written such a paragraph. In this paragraph, I compared the situation, the projections that were in the solar eclipse of 25th October 2022 with the projections of the lunar eclipse of 8 November 2022. And I paid attention to the territories that were duplicated, that is, were tense in both the solar and lunar eclipses. And so I noted Ukraine, Turkey, the Eastern USA, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, part of Russia adjacent to Ukraine, and the Crimean Peninsula. These territories were listed as those that could also perceive the tense energy from the eclipses. That is, we see that the territory was named, exact dates were given. As for the projections, they also more or less matched. Forecast. Here we have the projection of Saturn. It passes through Turkey. It touches Crimea and so on. But it passes through Turkey. Therefore, by the way, Turkey was mentioned. That is, theoretically, this earthquake was also predicted. Let's move on. Here I have a few small surprises. I have not yet had time to write articles about these episodes, but they need to be mentioned. They need to be mentioned. Turkey, 1939. Let me clarify now. Yes, 1939. The earthquake in Erzincan, Turkey. It was even stronger than the recent one in 2023. The magnitude was 7.8. About 33,000 dead. There you go. About 100,000 injured. That is a very, very serious earthquake. And here we see that on one hand, the projections of the luminaries pass through Turkey and the projection of Neptune. The epicenter of the earthquake fell on the projection of Neptune. Remember, I said that Neptune is neutral until it forms a tense aspect. There you go. This is the chart of the previous new moon. Yes. That is, the earthquake was on 27th October, and the chart is drawn for 10th December 1939. This Neptune, which worked in this case, and on the day of the earthquake, by the way, Mars stood in exact opposition to this Neptune. It was already, you could say, with a fairly wide orb, but the aspect of opposition was there. But on the day of the earthquake itself, Mars stretched this opposition to the limit, and such an outburst occurred. An outburst of energy. And it must be said that the general background of this new moon was, you see, a square from the luminaries to Jupiter. And Jupiter is the dispositor of the luminaries. Such a planet is called the ruler of the eclipse. Also a very important thing in such forecast. This creates such a general tense background. Neptune turned out to be the weak link. We looked at 1939. Here's another striking example. 1960. Chile. A strong earthquake, I think about 9 points. Many destructions, many dead. So what was interesting? The point on the new moon fell at the beginning of Aries. It had a square to Jupiter, creating, as in the previous episode, such a tense background. Let's look further. Yes. And again, the projection of Mars. It passed practically through all of Chile, and the epicenter of the earthquake very accurately lay on the projection of Mars. We can see Mars is here with us. Mars is in Aquarius and quite the exact position to Uranus. So Mars is also tense for us. I always note it as tense, but it also has and a negative aspect to Uranus, and in principle converging aspects to Pluto are tense. Thus the earthquake in Chile was also predicted without any particular difficulty. Now let me see what other interesting horoscopes I have here. Yes, the year 1976. In Chile, by the way, this was the chart of the previous eclipse. A fragment not of the new moon, but of the eclipse. The same solar eclipse chart. Here it is. Observed in the case of the earthquake in China, which occurred on the 28th of July 1976, 8.2 magnitude. About 250,000 people died. According to official data, unofficially they allegedly say 660. That is, the scale of destruction was enormous. Here is the astrocartographic map. Here we see that the epicenter of the earthquakes, by the way, it was 150 kilometers from Beijing, fell into the zone of influence, into the tense zone from Uranus. Accordingly, let's look. This is the horoscope of the previous solar eclipse. Let's see how it is positioned here. Well, the general background. These are the aspects of the luminaries. We have in the 10th degree of Taurus, the sun and the moon. And opposite in general in the 5th degree, that very Uranus, which was mentioned after viewing the astrocartographic map. Uranus was tense, already under tension at the moment of the solar eclipse. I am omitting a lot of nuances. That is, you need to look at the transits at the moment of the event itself, transits to the original chart, that is, in this case, to the solar eclipse. Everything works very well there. I will not dwell on this. I just want to say that the eclipse in China was also predicted by the method of astrocartography. Now let me see if we have more. I think that's enough. I have some more complex cases here. I will tell you straight away that not all earthquakes are so easily predicted as in the examples mentioned. Sometimes you need to think very hard. Some earthquakes, I admit, may not be possible to predict in this way at all. But let's say 50 to 60% of major earthquakes, those over 6.5 to 7 magnitude, are predicted by this method. And I have already, perhaps for 10 years, been publishing forecasts of this type. And I am skeptical that forecasts of this type will become part of the official forecasting tools. And therefore, considering the quality of my forecasts, I invite those who are interested, those who want to make a forecast, those people who want to make a forecast for their territory, for their city, for their region, for those people who are ready to order such work from me, I will gladly do it for you. There you go. Perhaps for 5 to 10 years ahead. Well, as we agree, I no longer approach official structures. Sorry, no need. Let them read my forecast. Well, what can I say? I need to say goodbye to you. Share this video. Let more people know about it, not just those acquaintances who know me through social networks. It's time to get acquainted with a new method for many, a workable method, the effectiveness of which is demonstrated by such important, vivid examples that I have listed. These are far from all that I have encountered. These are the ones that came to hand in recent days. All the best to you. Goodbye.